Hi there, welcome back. So this is the second part. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the framework that's emerged from the coherence group, which is a group that supports the area of learning experience groups in thinking about trying to make the design common across the areas of learning. And what we're going to do is I'm going to talk you through the framework as it currently sits, which is very similar to what I showed you on the previous slide, and then think about some of the key questions that emerge. So in terms of the existing framework, what we've got here in box 1 is the statement about how the AOLE supports the 4 purposes. That would be the first box that I showed you on the previous slide, and so we'll look at some examples of that in a minute. Box 2 here is the 6 to 8 overarching what matters statements and their accompanying rationales. So we can see how we start with the AOLE, how the AOLE supports 4 purposes, then into the what matters statements and rationales, which you've seen before. Now, one thing that the groups are currently considering is whether there's any necessity for this third box here, which is what are the key ideas, skills and dispositions that are found within the areas of learning and experience. In particular, this is where areas of learning and experience have more than one discipline. So an example might be humanities, where there is geography, history, RE, and social studies and business studies, which are named within Successful Futures, and where there's any need to actually state the role of those different subject areas in terms of the different ideas, skills and dispositions that they promote within young people, in terms of the disciplinary contribution to the area of learning and experience, or whether we can have the triggers for progression within the rationales, which I said we'll see later on, and then you can move straight into the, and these could actually be found within the progression narratives, which outline the general nature of changes across the years of schooling to achieve what matters statements. The idea here is that the ideas, skills and dispositions will appear within the progression narratives as a means of achieving the what matters statements. So, some thinking currently within AOLEs is actually box 3 might not be necessary, because we can capture the contribution of the different disciplinary skills and dispositions within this box. But you might have some thoughts about that. One of the key concerns is if we have too many steps between the area of learning supports the 4 purposes and into the progression narratives, people start to lose sight of the 4 purposes because they become perhaps too fixated around the ideas, skills, dispositions within disciplines, and lose some of that sort of interdisciplinarity that we're looking at trying to develop within the area of learning. And also, of course, the more complex you make the model, the more difficult it becomes to plan across areas of learning and experience. So that's the idea. We have the progression narratives here, and then eventually into the steps here, you'll have the achievement outcomes underneath the progression narrative and steps here. And what we've then got is the cross-curricular elements that would run through the area of learning experience, so the CCRs, but also the wider skills and the Welsh Dimension International Perspectives, which were key themes that emerged from the Strand 1 reports, and the idea of careers in the world of work, and how those elements could be integrated within the framework. Now, currently, as you can see, these are sitting outside the framework here. There is the thought that the CCRs and wider skills can be developed within the progression narratives here. But what about things like careers in the world of work? How should we signal the opportunities to develop those areas within the areas of learning experience? So a question you might want to consider in a while. And then over here, we've got a series of guiding principles for the areas of learning and experience. Now, this is quite important because we've not really seen this in the Welsh national curriculum before, or indeed in many places, in many countries across Britain. But we have seen this in some other international curricula. So Singapore, for example, is quite clear around the guiding principles for its curriculum, in that it does talk a lot about particular, they're referred to here as signature pedagogies, but the idea is particular methods for teaching and learning in particular curriculum areas. You'll know about the maths that's developed within Singapore. but also in New Zealand, there are particular approaches to inquiry work within social studies that are suggested to be good practice. So the idea is there will be guiding principles that are developed here. Now, as professional learning pioneers, one of the things that you'll be doing as you move into September is to start to think about some of those approaches to teaching and learning and what works best within the areas of learning to make some recommendations around some of these guiding principles. So it's quite important that you have the opportunity to sort of feed into this design. How's this going to work best? Is it going to be a series of videos? Is it going to be some videos and some documents? How's that best going to be framed within this design? So there we are. So that's the kind of the overarching design, the cross-curricular elements here. As I said, the thinking at the moment is they should be integrated within progression, but that could make the progression frameworks also quite long and quite detailed. It's going to be about how we try and marry these things together. And the guiding principles, what are the pedagogies, what exemplification are practitioners going to need, especially if we try and keep this framework as high level as we can so as not to be too prescriptive. So questions then, our task for you. This is a possible model that has been developed for the AOLE. What challenges can you foresee for practitioners having to engage in this framework? What additional support materials should be developed, and how and where should these be presented? So those questions go to you now, and you can have some time to consider them.